What if the boy you saved is the one who ends up breaking your heart? 10 years ago, Lena was the golden girl who saw a broken, beautiful soul in the quiet new kid Kai. Their love was a summer of healing under the coastal sun, a perfect, fragile world they built together. But when they went to separate colleges, the pressure and distance twisted a simple misunderstanding into an earth-shattering betrayal. He vanished without a word, leaving only a letter written in cold fury. Now, Lena's a successful attorney, and Kai is a famous, reclusive artist known for sculptures of a sorrowful angel. When his new exhibition comes to her city, she goes to finally face the ghost of her first love. But the truth behind their decade apart is more devastating and more beautiful than either of them ever imagined. This is a story about how the right love can find you twice, and how the deepest wounds sometimes need a lifetime to heal. Disclaimer: this channel features fictional psychological stories created for emotional exploration and storytelling purposes. All characters and events are fictional. Kai's first day at Coastal Cliff High began with the salt scent of the ocean and ended with the tinny taste of blood in his mouth. He'd bitten his cheek when the bus hit a pothole, a sharp, familiar pain that was easier to focus on than the knot in his stomach. He carried everything he owned in a single, faded duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and he carried his history in the set of his jaw and the hollow look in his eyes. The town was a postcard of gentle waves and brightly painted clapboard houses. But to Kai, it was just another backdrop, colorless and muffled, like he was watching everything from behind thick glass. He'd seen 3 towns in as many months since he'd left. Since everything had shattered. The divorce papers, his father's empty liquor bottles shattering against the wall, the screaming that had finally stopped, leaving only a silence more deafening than any noise. His father, a man who had once stood tall in uniform, now hunched and broken by demons he'd brought home from a war Kai never knew. And his mother gone in the night. A note on the fridge, the only goodbye. Now, here he was, 19 and a senior, the new kid in the middle of spring, a ghost walking among the living. The school hallway buzzed with the lazy energy of a Monday morning. Locker doors slammed, laughter echoed, and groups of friends flowed around him like water around a stone. He didn't try to merge. He kept his head down, his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum, his long sleeves pulled down to his wrists despite the coastal warmth. If anyone looked close, they might see the faint, silvery lines that traced his forearms, old maps of private wars. But no one looked close. In his first period class, the teacher introduced him with a cheerful, "Everyone, this is Kai. Make him feel welcome." A few curious glances, some whispered comments about his height and his quiet, intense presence. Then the moment passed. He took a seat in the back by the window and willed himself to become part of the furniture. By lunch, the novelty had worn off for everyone else, but it had crystallized into something else for a few. The cafeteria was a wall of sound. Kai found an empty corner table, unwrapped the dry sandwich he'd packed, and tried to eat. He felt the stares before he heard the voices. "Check out the zombie," a low voice chuckled from a nearby table. It belonged to Mark, a guy with a varsity jacket and a loud laugh. His friends snickered. "Heard he got kicked out of his last school," another added, not bothering to lower his voice. "Family's messed up or something." Kai's grip tightened on his sandwich. He didn't look up. Don't engage. Be invisible. It was a mantra that had kept him safe, or at least out of further trouble. After lunch, in the crowded hallway transition had happened. A shoulder, too hard, too pointed, slammed into his side. His duffel bag, which he'd foolishly been carrying, slipped from his grip. The clasp burst open. His few notebooks, a dog-eared paperback, and a single framed photograph of his mother from happier times spilled across the floor with a sound like falling leaves. "Oops. Clumsy," Mark said, not sounding sorry at all. His friends formed a half circle, blocking the flow of traffic, their smirks a wall of their own. Heat flooded Kai's face, a mix of shame and a rage so cold it froze him in place. He dropped to his knees, his movements stiff, and began scrambling to gather his things. His fingers closed around the picture frame first, clutching it to his chest. The laughter around him was a dull roar in his ears. He focused on the linoleum, on the scuff marks, on anything but the faces leering down at him. This was familiar, too, a different kind of pain, but pain all the same. Then a pair of clean white sneakers stepped into his field of vision. They didn't kick his books. They stopped. He saw a hand, slender and sure, pick up his battered copy of The Old Man and the Sea. Then another hand gathered his math notebook. He slowly looked up, bracing for another joke, another insult. He met a pair of warm, intelligent brown eyes. The girl kneeling in front of him was objectively the kind of person who belonged on a yearbook cover or a scholarship brochure. Lena. He'd heard her name already, whispered with a kind of reverence. Lena, the class valedictorian. Lena, whose dad was some big-shot architect. Lena, with the perfect smile and the easy confidence that came from a life where everything had always just worked. But in her eyes now, he didn't see pity. He saw a quiet, focused attention. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a terrifying second, he felt seen, not as the new freak or the tragic case, but as a person. She looked from his guarded face to the photo he was clutching, then back to his eyes. Her gaze held a question, not a judgment. The noisy hallway seemed to fade around them. Mark and his friends had stopped laughing, unsure how to proceed with the school's golden girl in the mix. Lena stacked his books neatly, closed his duffel bag's clasp with a firm click, and held it out to him. "Here," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, cutting through the residual snickers. Kai took the bag, his fingers brushing against hers for a split second. He expected her to say something like, "It'll be okay," or "Don't mind them," the empty, polite things people say. He waited for the facade to crack, for her to hurry off to her perfect friends. Instead, he said nothing. "No, thank you." The words were lodged in his throat, buried under layers of frost. He just stared at her, his expression a mask of cold suspicion. This was a trick. It had to be. Kindness always came with a price. Lena didn't seem to expect thanks. She didn't look offended or put out. She simply stood up, dusting off her knees. She glanced over at Mark's group, who were now pretending to be deeply interested in a locker combination. Then she looked back down at Kai, who was still kneeling on the floor, a shipwrecked sailor clutching his last possession. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It wasn't a bright, beaming smile for the crowd. It was smaller, just for him, laced with a practicality that felt utterly foreign. "Lansao, ne me gad aranye," she said softly. "Next time, just steer clear of those guys." Her tone was matter-of-fact, like she was giving him a useful tip for navigating the hallways, not acknowledging his humiliation. She turned to go, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. Her dark hair swung gently. "Tento la Lena." And then she was gone, melting back into the stream of students heading to class, leaving him alone on the floor. Kai finally stood, his legs shaky. He clutched his bag to his chest, the ghost of her touch still on the strap. The hallway noise rushed back in, but it felt different now. The cold, numb shell he'd been living in had a tiny, hairline crack in it. Through it seeped a feeling so strange and faint, he almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't relief, it wasn't happiness. It was the faint, unsettling spark of a connection. Someone had seen the wreckage and hadn't looked away. Someone had offered a hand not to pull him into the light, but to simply sit with him in the dark for a single, silent moment. He didn't know her. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anyone. But as he walked to his next class, the echo of her name, Lena, followed him, a soft, persistent sound in the quiet, storm-tossed sea of his mind. For the first time in a very, very long time, he felt something other than nothing. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The incident in the hallway didn't magically change things. Kai still sat alone. He still ate his dry sandwich in the corner, a fortress of one. The whispers about the quiet, creepy new guy continued. But now they were punctuated by a new, curious gaze. Lena watched him. She didn't stare, because that wasn't her style. But in the margins of her perfect notes, between solving advanced calculus problems, her eyes would find him. He was a puzzle. The hollow look in his eyes the day his books fell wasn't just sadness, it was a complete shutdown, like someone had turned off all the lights inside. And she had seen him flinch, a tiny, almost invisible recoil, when that guy Mark had laughed too loud. It was a flinch she recognized, though she couldn't say why. So she decided to do something about it. Her first attempt was in Algebra 2. The teacher had just assigned a set of brutal word problems. As the class groaned and gathered into their usual study pairs, Lena took a deep breath, picked up her notebook, and walked to the back of the room. Kai was staring out the window, his own notebook blank. "Hey," Lena said, her voice purposely light. He turned slowly, his expression guarded like he was waiting for an attack. Problem 7 is a monster. Mr. Jacobs loves these torturous train and speed things. Any chance you've cracked it? She placed her open notebook on his desk, pointing to the problem. It was a lie. She'd already solved it in her head during the teacher's explanation. Kai looked from her face to the problem, then back to her face. His dark eyes were unreadable. No, he said flatly. The word was a door slamming shut. Oh, Lena said, undeterred. She tapped her pen on the paper. Well, maybe we could figure it out. 2 heads, you know. I work alone, he muttered, turning back to the window. His shoulders were tense, hunched up near his ears. Lena felt a flicker of frustration, but also a stronger pull of curiosity. He wasn't just shy, he was actively pushing the world away. She took her notebook back. Okay, suit yourself. Let me know if the train ever arrives at the station. He didn't smile, he didn't react at all. A few days later, she tried a different approach. The History Project, a paired research presentation on post-war eras, was announced. Partners were optional. Most people scrambled for their friends. Lena watched as Kai didn't move, simply writing solo on the sign-up sheet with a stiff hand. She intercepted him after class, falling into step beside him in the hallway. He sped up slightly. She matched his pace. The History Project, she said, getting straight to the point. You should partner with me. This time he stopped and looked at her fully. The confusion in his eyes was almost comical, mixed with suspicion. Why? Because I'm good at research, and you look like you could use a good grade, she said, which was only half the truth. The full truth was that he looked like he was drowning and a project partner was a rope, however thin. I don't need help, he said, his voice low and rough. Everyone needs help sometimes, Lena countered softly. His jaw tightened. Not from you. He said it not with malice, but with a finality that felt heavy. He walked away, leaving her standing there, more determined than ever. The breakthrough didn't come from one of her plans. It came from the weather. A slow, persistent rain began after lunch, turning the sky the color of old chalk and trapping everyone indoors. The usual after-school buzz migrated to the gym or the noisy cafeteria. The library, with its high ceilings and the smell of old paper, became a cave of quiet. Lena was there, returning a stack of college prep books. As she walked between the towering shelves, she saw him. Kai was tucked into a carrel at the very back, hidden in the shadows cast by a large world globe. He wasn't reading. He had a cheap spiral notebook open, and his hand was moving quickly, almost desperately across the page. He was drawing, but not pictures of people or landscapes. From her angle, she could see dark, overlapping geometric shapes, jagged triangles, spiral that looked like barbed wire, dense, scribbled black boxes that seemed to swallow the light. It was chaos on paper. Her heart gave a funny little squeeze. She put her books on the return cart and, without really deciding to, walked over. She didn't ask if she could sit. She simply pulled out the wooden chair opposite him and sat down. Kai's head snapped up. His hand froze, hovering over the page as if caught in a crime. His eyes widened, then narrowed. He said nothing. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Lena met his gaze for a brief second, gave a small, neutral nod, and then looked down. She unzipped her bag, pulled out her history textbook, and opened it to a random chapter. She started reading about the Industrial Revolution, or pretended to. She made her breathing even. She turned a page with a soft shush. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the cafeteria. This was the silence of a shared space. The only sounds were the distant hum of the heater, the soft drum of rain on the library's skylight, and the faint scratch of his pencil starting to move again, slower now. Minutes ticked by. He didn't tell her to leave. He didn't pack up his things. He just kept drawing his dark, intricate patterns, occasionally glancing at her with a look of profound confusion. Lena felt his eyes on her, but she kept reading, allowing the quiet to settle around them like the rain-scented gloom outside. She was giving him something he clearly never had, company without demand, presence without pressure. Finally, the sound that broke the silence wasn't a page turning. It was his voice, rusty from disuse, so low she almost didn't hear it over the rain. Why are you doing this? Lena didn't look up immediately. She finished her sentence, then slowly closed her book. She raised her eyes to meet his. The defensive wall was still there, but she saw a crack in it now. Just a hairline fracture of pure, exhausted bewilderment. Doing what? She asked, her voice just as quiet. This. He gestured vaguely between them with his pencil. asking me about math, the project. Sitting here, I'm not, he struggled for the words, his throat working. I'm not interesting. I have nothing to say. Lena considered him. She saw the shadows under his eyes, the careful way he held himself to avoid touching anything, the frantic, sad shapes on his notebook that screamed what his mouth would not. She thought of her own quiet house, full of beautiful things and silent rooms. She thought of the polite smiles that never reached anyone's eyes at her parents' parties. A different kind of loneliness, but loneliness all the same. She didn't offer a cheerful platitude. She didn't tell him it would be okay. She told him the truth, simple and plain. Because you look like you're really lonely, she said, holding his gaze. And I hate loneliness. For a long moment, Kai just stared at her. The pencil slipped from his fingers and rolled across the notebook, leaving a faint gray streak over one of his dark boxes. The suspicion in his eyes flickered, then dimmed, replaced by a dawning, vulnerable shock. It was as if she hadn't just spoken to him, but had reached through the glass wall he lived behind and touched him on the shoulder. No one had ever said that. They'd called him quiet, weird, troubled. They'd whispered about his family, his scars, his attitude. But no one had ever named the core of it, the vast echoing solitude that had been his only companion for so long. He looked down at his chaotic drawing, then back at her calm, sincere face. The fortress walls, built brick by brick over months of pain, didn't crumble, but deep in their foundation, in a place he thought had gone numb forever, he felt a single, profound tremor. Someone saw him. Not the story, not the problem. Him. And for the first time since his world had ended, the feeling that washed over him wasn't cold. It was terrifying. After the library, something shifted. It was a tiny, almost invisible gear turning in the clockwork of their world. Kai didn't seek Lena out, but he stopped running away. When she approached his table at lunch, holding her tray, he didn't get up and leave. He just gave a slight, nearly imperceptible nod towards the empty chair opposite him. It was a monumental gesture. Lena's campaign of quiet persistence began in earnest. She didn't try to drag him to loud parties or force him into groups. She understood instinctively that his world had to be small and safe. Her first invitation was to the cliffs. I need to clear my head before finals, she said one Tuesday after school, leaning against his locker. There's a spot where you can see the whole ocean. It's quiet. Come with me. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching for the trap. Why? Because I don't like walking alone, she said, which was only partly true. The full truth was in her steady, waiting gaze. He came. The path was rocky, lined with tough, wind-bent grass. The air smelled of salt and wild rosemary. At the edge, the land fell away into a sheer drop where the ocean crashed and foamed against ancient rocks far below. The noise was immense, but it was a clean, roaring noise that swallowed up all the smaller, meaner sounds of the world. Kai stood a safe distance from the edge, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, but Lena saw his shoulders drop for the first time since she'd met him. The wind tugged at his hair. He closed his eyes and just breathed. It's loud, he said after a long while, his voice almost lost in the wind. Yeah, Lena agreed, sitting on a flat, sun-warmed rock. But it's an honest loud. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but the ghost of one. The next place was Mr. Finch's used books. A dusty, narrow shop that smelled of vanilla pipe tobacco and old paper. The bell above the door jingled like a tired sigh. Lena went straight to the poetry section in the back. Kai lingered near the front, tracing the cracked spines of old adventure novels with a hesitant finger. He lets you read here as long as you want, Lena whispered, handing him a worn copy of a book. It was The Stranger by Camus. This one feels familiar, she said softly. He took it, his fingers brushing the cover. He didn't open it, just held it. My dad used to throw books, he said. The words so quiet Lena almost didn't hear them. When he was angry, they'd hit the wall, pages everywhere. He looked up as if surprised the words had escaped. Sorry. Don't be, Lena said, her voice steady. She took the book back and placed it gently on the shelf. We don't have to talk. But later, on the walk home, as the sun painted the sky in watercolor streaks of orange and purple, he did talk. It started in stops and bursts, like a rusty faucet finally being forced open. He was a soldier. He saw things, bad things. Kai stared straight ahead at the sidewalk cracks. When he came back, he wasn't my dad anymore. He was just anger in a bottle. He swallowed hard. The fighting. Every night, my mom, she just took it. Then one day, she didn't. She just left. And it was just me and him. Lena walked beside him, her hands clasped behind her back, listening with her whole being. One night, he thought I was hiding her. He had this belt. Kai's voice hitched. He stopped walking, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked down at his arms, hidden under his long sleeves. A tremor started in his hands, a fine, uncontrollable shaking. Without a word, Lena reached out. She didn't grab, didn't pull. She simply laid her hand over his trembling one, her palm warm and solid against his cold skin. She held on, grounding him to the sidewalk, to the present, to her. He didn't pull away. He turned his hand and gripped hers so tightly it almost hurt, clinging to her like she was the only thing keeping him from being swept away by the memory. "I was scared," he whispered, the confession raw and ragged. "I'm still scared, and I hate that I'm scared. I hate that I couldn't stop him. I hate that I couldn't save her." "It wasn't your job to save her," Lena said, her own voice thick with emotion. "It was his job to protect you. Both of you." A single hot tear traced a path down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away with his free hand, ashamed. But Lena just held on tighter, her touch saying everything her words couldn't. "I see you, I see all of it, and I'm still here." That summer, they became a fixture. The golden girl and the boy from the shadows. They were an odd pair, turning heads on the rare occasions they were seen in town. Lena in her bright sundresses, Kai in his perpetual dark jeans and long sleeves. But they didn't care. Lena taught him how to laugh again. It started as a surprised huff of air at one of her terrible jokes, then grew into a real, low chuckle that seemed to startle him as much as it did her. She dragged him to the town's terrible summer carnival, and he won her a grotesque purple teddy bear at the shooting gallery, a hint of a proud smile on his face. And Kai, in turn, showed Lena a world she never knew. He saw the melancholy in a sunset, the story in the chipped paint of an old fishing boat. He expressed himself in the poems he started writing in a secret notebook. Not the dark shapes of before, but words, aching and beautiful, about the sea, the silence, and the girl with the warm hands. He showed her that depth wasn't about being happy all the time, but about feeling everything intensely. The night of their high school graduation, they escaped the loud gymnasium party. They found their way to their stretch of beach, the one below the cliffs. The moon was a perfect silver coin, laying a shimmering path across the black water. They kicked off their shoes and let the cool, wet sand squish between their toes. Lena stood looking at the water, the gentle breeze playing with the hem of her simple white dress. She felt him come up behind her, his presence a warmth at her back. He didn't speak for a long time. Then his arms came around her, slowly, carefully, as if she were made of moonlight and might disappear. He rested his chin on top of her head, and she leaned back into him, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against her back. His voice, when it came, was rough with emotion, vibrating through her. "You're the only light I have, Lena." He buried his face in her hair, his words muffled but clear. "Before you, it was all dark. I don't know what I'm worth without you." The raw honesty of it stole her breath. It wasn't a flowery confession. It was a truth pulled from the deepest, most wounded part of him and offered to her, fragile and complete. She turned in his arms. In the moonlight, his face was all sharp angles and soft shadows, his eyes pools of dark, vulnerable sincerity. She saw the boy who drew chaos, the boy who flinched at loud noises, the boy who had given her his broken pieces to hold. And she saw the man he was becoming, strong and kind in ways that had nothing to do with muscles or bravado. She didn't answer with words. She reached up, cupped his face in her hands, feeling the faint stubble on his jaw. She saw his breath catch. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a sweet kiss, tentative at first, a question. Then it deepened into a promise of summer, of healing, of a future. His arms tightened around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with a desperate, grateful intensity that spoke of loneliness finally ending. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, the world had changed. The sound of the waves was a love song. The moon was their witness. They stood there, wrapped in each other in the vast, hopeful night, two lost souls who had, against all odds, found their way home in each other. They were in love. The promises they made under the graduation moon felt solid, like vows carved in stone. They would visit. They would call every day. They would make it work. Kai was heading to a prestigious art school in New York City, a miracle he'd scraped together with a portfolio of his haunting emotional drawings and a last-minute scholarship. Lena was off to Stanford, the expected path for a golden girl, to study political science. The future was a bright, wide-open road in two different directions. For a while, the road seemed wide enough for both of them. The first month was a blur of frantic, happy calls. Kai, his voice full of odd energy, would describe his life. The cramped dorm room that smelled of turpentine and old wood. The intimidating critique sessions where professors dissected his unresolved emotional landscapes. The sheer, overwhelming noise and pace of the city that never slept. Lena would listen, curled up in her neatly decorated dorm, and tell him about sunny California courtyards, impossible reading lists, and her surprisingly quirky roommate. But slowly the bright energy began to dim, worn down by the sheer weight of being exceptional in places designed to test the limits of the exceptional. Kai's world was a brutal kind of pressure. His talent, which had been a private language of pain for so long, was now being picked apart in public. His classmates came from galleries and legacy. He came from a broken home and a coastal cliff. He worked late-night shifts at a copy shop to afford supplies, his hands stained with ink instead of paint. The calls grew later, shorter. "I'm just tired," he'd say, his face pixelated and pale on her laptop screen, shadows like bruises under his eyes. "The project is killing me." The light she had lit in him was flickering under the strain of proving he deserved to be in that room. Lena's pressure was different, but just as heavy. It was the weight of expectation, polished to a high shine. Her mother, Eleanor, called every Sunday without fail. The conversations were masterclasses in passive-aggressive planning. "Lena, darling, your father and I were speaking with the Hendersons. Their son, Daniel, is at Stanford Law now. Top of his class, of course." Her mother's voice was like cool silk through the phone. "I've arranged an introductory internship for you at his firm's San Francisco branch this summer. It will be invaluable." "Mom, I have plans," Lena would protest weakly, thinking of the cheap flight to New York she'd been saving for. "Plans can adjust, sweetheart. This is your future we're discussing. Daniel is a lovely young man, very focused, very suitable." The word suitable hung in the air, a silent comparison to everything Kai was not. Unpredictable, artistic, emotionally scarred, and from a world of chaos her family could never understand. Daniel became a persistent presence. He was as advertised, suitable, handsome in a clean-cut way, polite, ambitious. He'd message her to check in about the internship paperwork. Her mother just happened to invite him for dinner during his visit home, and Lena found herself trapped at a table where the conversation revolved around bar exam pass rates and networking events. Daniel's glances were appreciative, logical. He saw her as a perfect addition to a perfect future plan. She smiled until her cheeks ached and counted the minutes until she could escape to her room and text Kai. But she never told Kai the full extent of it. She'd mention family stuff or this annoying intern thing. She told herself she was protecting him, shielding their fragile, long-distance love from the cold scrutiny of her mother's world. She was so tired of fighting battles, the battle to prove herself at Stanford, the battle to manage her mother, the battle to keep Kai's spirit alive from 3,000 miles away. Hiding this one thing felt like a necessary respite. The crack started small, a missed call from Kai because she was at a family dinner with Daniel present, a short, vague text from her when he needed to hear her voice after a particularly harsh critique. The distance between them stopped being just miles and started becoming a chill in their conversations. It all came to a head on a Tuesday night. Lena was exhausted. She'd just spent 2 hours on the phone with her mother, defending her choice of a comparative literature elective. "It's not a resume builder, Lena." Daniel had sent 3 polite but persistent emails about summer housing options. Her head was pounding. When Kai's video call request came through, she almost didn't answer. But she did, forcing a smile. He looked wrecked. His hair was a mess. His old hoodie was speckled with what looked like charcoal dust, and his eyes held that hollow, faraway look she hadn't seen since the early days at Coastal Cliff. Her heart sank. "Hey," she said, her voice sounding brittle to her own ears. "Hey." His voice was flat. He didn't ask about her day. He just stared at her through the screen, his gaze intense and searching. The silence stretched, filled only with the faint hum of his dorm room heater. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. "No," he said bluntly. He ran a hand over his face. "I just got my mid-review back. They said my work is technically proficient but emotionally manipulative, that it fetishizes pain." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "What do they know? They want pain to be pretty." "Kai, that's awful. I'm sorry." So sorry. Where were you last night? He interrupted, his eyes locking onto hers. I called. You didn't pick up. Lena's stomach tightened. It was a family thing. I told you. Family thing, he repeated, the words dull. With the suitable guy? She froze. She'd never mentioned that word to him. What? Your mom posted a picture. Wonderful dinner with the future leaders. You're there, he's there smiling. Kai's voice was dangerously quiet. You look like a perfect couple. A hot flush of guilt and anger spread through Lena. You're checking my mom's social media. Kai, it was just dinner. Then why don't you ever talk about it? He fired back, the dam breaking. Why don't you ever just tell them about me? Hey, Mom, Dad, remember the messed up guy from high school? The one with the scars? We're in love. Deal with it. Why do I always have to be the secret, Lena? His words hit her like physical blows. All the exhaustion, the pressure of navigating two worlds, the constant feeling of never being enough for either, erupted. Because it's complicated, Kai, she snapped, her voice rising. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over. You don't understand what my family is like. It's not a simple deal with it conversation. It's a minefield. Every single thing is a negotiation, a performance, and sometimes I'm just so tired of having to explain and defend everything. I'm tired of defending my choices to them, and I'm tired of carrying this. The moment the words left her mouth, she wanted to claw them back. She saw him flinch, as if she'd struck him. The screen seemed to freeze. The this hung in the digital air between them. The weight of his past, his pain, their love. Kai's face went blank, the anger dissolving into something worse. A deep, wounded shock. The connection they'd fought so hard to build over video calls and texts suddenly felt like a frayed wire, sparking and dangerous. Carrying this, he echoed, his voice a hollow whisper. He nodded slowly, looking not at her, but at something broken on his desk. I see. Kai, no, that's not what I meant. I think I need to go, he said, his tone final and utterly drained. Please don't hang up. Let's talk. But the screen went dark. The call ended. Lena stared at the black rectangle on her laptop, reflecting her own tear-streaked, horrified face. The silence in her Stanford dorm room was absolute and crushing. The first real crack had splintered right through the center of them, and on either side, all she could hear was the deafening sound of their shared heartbreaking. The silence after their fight was a living thing. It stretched for days, a cold, hollow space where their daily texts and calls used to be. Lena sent a few tentative messages. Can we talk? I'm sorry for what I said. They were met with radio silence. The read receipt sat there, a tiny, merciless accusation. In New York, Kai was unraveling. His creative block was total. The blank canvas in his dorm studio mocked him. The professor's words, manipulative, fetishized his pain, echoed in his head, mixing with Lena's, sometimes I'm just so tired of carrying this. He started to believe them. Maybe his pain wasn't art. Maybe it was just a burden. He stopped going to classes. He spent hours lying on his bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a fractured heart. His roommate, Ben, a photography major with more kindness than tact, tried to pull him out of it. One afternoon, while Kai was mechanically eating cereal straight from the box, Ben scrolled through his phone on the couch. Hey, man, Ben said, his voice casual. Your girl back in Cali? She's Lena, right? Kai grunted, a non-answer. Just saw a pic of her on my feed. She was at some fancy charity thing with some guy, a lawyer type, looked like. Dude's wearing a suit that probably costs more than our tuition. Ben whistled. They look chummy. A cold drip of dread traced Kai's spine. He put the cereal box down. What? Your mom tagged you in it, I think, or wait, no, it was her mom. Eleanor something. Ben held out his phone. See? Kai took the device as if it were a live wire. There it was on Eleanor's polished Instagram feed, a picture from a Sunshine Charity Gala. Lina, breathtaking in a deep blue gown, her smile polite and strained. Next to her, standing too close, his hand a gentlemanly inch from the small of her back, was Daniel. He was indeed in a perfect suit, smiling a perfect, suitable smile. The caption was a knife twist. So proud of our Lena, shining bright at the gala with the wonderful Daniel. Two brilliant futures. # family friend, # proud mom, sunshine, charity. Two brilliant futures. The words blurred. Kai's vision tunneled. He saw the perfect picture, the perfect couple, the perfect future his mother had always wanted for her. A future that had no room for a broke, messed up art student from a broken home. The secret he'd accused her of keeping wasn't a secret anymore. It was a public announcement. His heart didn't just sink. It felt like it was being crushed in a vice. He handed the phone back to Ben without a word, walked to the bathroom, and was violently sick. That same night, 3,000 miles away, Lena was trapped in a gilded cage. The mandatory family dinner was, in fact, a small, elegant fundraiser at her parents' club. Daniel was her appointed escort. Her mother's eyes gleamed with satisfaction every time they were in the same frame. Lena felt like a doll, smiling, nodding, dying inside. She missed Kai with a physical ache. She needed to hear his voice, even if it was angry. She needed to know they could fix this. Daniel was attentive, overly so. He kept her wine glass full with a rich, potent red. "You seem stressed," he'd say smoothly, topping her off before she could refuse. "This will help." The room grew warm and fuzzy at the edges. The voices became a dull roar. She lost count. When the event finally ended, the world was tilting. Her heels were unsteady on the marble steps. "You're in no state to drive," Daniel said, his hand firm under her elbow. "I'll take you home. My driver is here." Lena, her thoughts thick and slow, couldn't muster a protest. She just wanted to lie down. She mumbled her address and slid into the back of the sleek black car. What happened next was a blur of bad luck and poor choices. A few blocks from her apartment, flashing red and blue lights filled the car. A routine traffic stop. The officer smelled alcohol. Daniel, confident and smirking, agreed to a breathalyzer. The number that flashed was over the limit. Chaos erupted. Daniel was ordered out of the car, his cocksure demeanor crumbling into indignant bluster as he was handcuffed. Lena, stumbling out after him into the cold night air, was sobered by a wave of pure animal panic. The police were talking about taking them to the station. Her parents. The scandal. Stanford. Her mind, fogged and terrified, scrambled for a lifeline. She fumbled for her phone. Her shaking fingers bypassed her parents' numbers. They bypassed anyone sensible. In her terrified, alcohol-soaked brain, there was only one person who had ever made her feel safe. One person who was her harbor in any storm. She called Kai. The line rang and rang. Her breath hitched in ragged sobs, then a click. "Hello?" His voice was cold, flat. Not a question, just a sound. "Kai, it's me. I'm in trouble," she slurred, tears and wine thickening her words. The connection crackled, a bad signal near the patrol cars. "Me and Daniel, we got stopped by the police. Can you come get me at the Central Police Station?" The broken words were a jigsaw puzzle falling into the most horrific picture in Kai's mind. He was standing in his dark dorm room, the glow of his laptop illuminating the charity photo of her and Daniel. Two brilliant futures. "Me and Daniel, we've got stopped by the police." His blood turned to ice, then erupted into fire. So it was true, not just a picture. They were together, out, and now in trouble, together. His voice, when it came, was a guttural, choked thing. "What did you do to get arrested?" The words were sharp stones. "You're with him right now?" Lena, on her end, heard only the anger, not the shattered pain beneath it. The world was spinning. A police officer was telling her to get in the car. "Just come, please. I'm begging you," she wept, the words dissolving into incoherent crying. That was it, the sound of her crying for him while she was with him. It was the final devastating proof of his worst fears. The boy who had always felt unworthy, who had believed her light was a temporary gift, saw it being given to someone else. The pain was too immense. It transformed into a weapon. He didn't shout. The words he spoke next were low, venomous, and precise, each one a nail in the coffin of them. "Figure it out yourself." The phrase was icy, dismissive. "I'm not your keeper, and I'm sure as hell not his." The distinction was cruel, final. "Don't call me again." The line went dead. Lena stood frozen on the sidewalk, the phone still pressed to her ear. The dial tone a shrill scream in the silent void he had left. The officer gently took her arm to guide her into the patrol car. She didn't resist. She felt nothing. The world had gone completely, utterly quiet. In New York, Kai threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor. He stood there, shaking, the phantom pain of old belt lashes flaming across his skin. Then, with mechanical, furious movements, he strode over, picked up the shattered device, and through the glitching screen, pulled up her contact. He blocked her number. He deleted their text thread. He erased every trace. He did it not out of anger alone, but from a place of deepest, most fundamental survival. It was the only way to stop the bleeding from a wound that felt fatal. He turned his back on the broken phone, on the broken image on his laptop, and on the broken piece of his soul that had always belonged to her. For the first time since she found him in that high school hallway, he chose the cold, familiar embrace of the dark over the terrifying risk of her light. Lena woke to the sterile smell of hotel linen and the taste of old wine and panic on her tongue. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains, too bright, too cheerful. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all rushed back. The gala, Daniel's persistent pouring, the flashing lights, the cold sidewalk, and Kai's voice, cold as a shard of glass, telling her to figure it out herself. She sat bolt upright, her head pounding in protest. She was in a nice hotel room, her evening dress neatly hung in the closet, her purse on the desk. A note in her mother's elegant script lay on the nightstand. The police called us. We sorted it. Daniel's father handled his side. Rest, we'll talk later. Sorted it, like a logistical error, not a heart shattered into pieces. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone. Dozens of missed calls from her parents, one from a blocked number that must have been the police station. Nothing from Kai. Her breath hitched. She dialed his number. It went straight to a busy signal, not even a ring. She tried again and again. Busy, busy, busy. A cold realization dawned. Blocked. Frantically, she opened their text thread. Her last messages from days ago were still marked read. She typed new ones, her fingers slipping on the screen. Kai, please. Please, it was a misunderstanding. It's not what you think. Please just call me. Let me explain. I was scared. I was drunk. It was nothing. I love you. Only you, please. She sent them. They showed as delivered for a terrifying second. Then a tiny red exclamation point appeared next to each one. Failed. He had blocked her there too. She moved to every social media platform she could think of. Instagram messages, Facebook, even a professional networking site they'd joked about. She pleaded into the digital void, her messages bouncing back or disappearing into an unread abyss. He had built a wall against her, brick by digital brick, and she was on the outside screaming at concrete. The despair that rose in her was a tidal wave. It wasn't just sadness. It was a frantic, clawing need to fix this, to make him see. She couldn't eat. She couldn't think. She called her professors, her voice robotic, claiming a family emergency. She booked the next red-eye flight to New York with shaking hands, not caring about the cost, not caring about anything but getting to him. The art school dormitory was a grim, concrete building that smelled of damp and ambition. Lena, still in the clothes she'd thrown on from her suitcase, felt a world away from the sunny Stanford courtyards. She found his room number from an old email and knocked, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door opened. It was a guy with kind eyes and a camera around his neck. Ben. Hi, I'm looking for Kai, Lena said, her voice thin. Ben's face shifted into an expression of pity that made her stomach drop. You're Lena. Yes, is he here? He moved out a few days ago. Ben scratched his head, looking uncomfortable. He was in a real bad way. Packed up everything in like an hour. Didn't say where he was going, just said he had to go. Did he leave a forwarding address, a phone number, anything? Nothing. He was pretty clear he didn't want to be found. Ben's gaze was apologetic. I'm sorry. The corridor seemed to tilt. Lena placed a hand on the cold wall to steady herself. He was gone. He had vanished. The boy who had once been so afraid of being left had become the one who left, and he had done it so completely it felt like an erasure. She stood there in front of the closed door of his empty life, and the tears came then. Huge, silent, heaving sobs that held all the confusion and love and devastation of the past week. Her world didn't just feel broken, it felt empty. The center of it had disappeared. Back in California, life became a gray, muffled routine. She went to class, she ate, she slept. She was a ghost moving through the motions. Her parents were coldly disappointed, speaking of reckless behavior and damage to reputation, but their words barely registered. The only thing that mattered was the silence from Kai. Then, 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at her parents' house. It was the only permanent address he'd ever known for her. Her name was written on the envelope, in a handwriting she knew intimately, but it was different. Jagged. The letters pressed so hard into the paper they were almost torn. The lines sloping like someone writing in a storm. She took it to her room, her hands ice cold. She opened it. Lena, I saw everything. The happy family picture and the phone call that night. You made your choice. Stay with the right person for your world. Don't look for me. I don't want to be the ugly part of your perfect life's memory. Let me be. Kai. She read it once. Then again, the words weren't just ink, they were acid, burning the meaning she so desperately wanted to see into them. He knows. That was her first searing thought. He knows about the police, about the humiliating arrest, about my failure. He knows the whole messy truth, and he still thinks I chose Daniel. He thinks I wanted that. He's not just hurt by a picture. He's judging me for the worst night of my life. He's condemning me. The injustice of it was a physical pain. He had the facts, the police, the call from the station, and had still twisted them into a story of her betrayal. She felt crucified by a crime she didn't commit, sentenced by a judge who refused to hear her explanation. The letter wasn't a goodbye from a hurting boy. It felt like a verdict from a stranger. The Kai she knew, the one who saw her soul in a library years ago, was gone. In his place was this angry, unforgiving ghost who believed the worst of her. What she couldn't know is that Kai's everything was a different picture entirely. He saw a glossy photo of a perfect couple and heard a frantic, broken voice say, "Me and Daniel, we got stopped by the police." In his mind, cemented by a lifetime of insecurity, the story wrote itself. She was out with Daniel, living the public life she'd hidden from him, and got into trouble together. A private, intimate trouble. The police detail was just a sordid footnote to the main story of her choice. Two truths, parallel and never touching. His truth. She had publicly chosen a suitable life and a suitable man. Her truth, he had coldly abandoned her in her most vulnerable, mistaken moment. Both were wrong. Both were real. The letter was the final nail. A month later, an administrative email from the art school, a formal notice she'd signed up for in a desperate hope of finding a trail, popped into her inbox. It stated that Kai Andrews had officially withdrawn from the program, effective immediately, and all further contacts should be directed to his personal email, which was no longer active. Withdrawn, no longer active. Lena was sitting at her pristine desk in her Stanford dorm. She read the words on the screen, the clinical language of disappearance. And then, with a quiet finality that surprised her, she simply folded forward, her forehead coming to rest on the cool wood. No more sobs, no more screams. Just a total, silent collapse. The last thread of hope, the one she'd been clinging to with bloody fingertips, had just been cut. He was gone, not just from a dorm room or a city, but from the future. The story of them was over, and the final page was a letter written in anger and read in despair, a monument to a misunderstanding that had become, for both of them, the only truth they could bear to live with. For Kai, the pain did not fade. It fossilized. It became the bedrock upon which he built a new life. The boy who was Kai Andrews, Lena's Kai, died the night he blocked her number. In his place emerged K. He used his middle name, a sharp single syllable that felt like a blade cutting ties to the past. The story he told himself was simple, brutal, and unchanging. Lena, his light, had seen the easier, brighter path, and had taken it. She had chosen the suitable world, the suitable man. The frantic phone call was just the messy proof of a choice already made. He had been a temporary shelter, a rebellious phase. Daniel was the permanent, polished future. This belief was not a sadness he nursed. It was a fuel he burned. He threw himself into his art with a furious, almost self-destructive energy. He worked construction by day, his hands growing rough and scarred, and painted by the dim light of a rented warehouse by night. He didn't paint to heal. He painted to excise. His canvases were large, dark, and mesmerizing, and in the center of many of them was her. But it was never the Lena of the library or the cliffs. It was an angel with fractured wings, made of stained glass and sorrow, a face of perfect beauty, looking away, always away, toward a source of light that left the rest of her in shadow. He sculpted her in cold marble, her form graceful but her eyes downcast, as if ashamed of her own fall from grace. Critics called his work a profound exploration of betrayal and lost divinity. They didn't know it was a biography. He became famous in certain circles. Kay was known as a brilliant, reclusive artist whose work pulsed with a raw, unsettling pain. He lived alone. He spoke little. He dated no one. The ghost of a golden girl was the only company he kept, forever preserved in his mind as both his savior and his betrayer. For Lena, the pain was a chameleon. It changed form, blending into the landscape of her life until it was almost invisible. But its shape was always there. Kai's letter had been a verdict. The boy who had seen her soul, the real one, not the perfect shell, had looked at the worst, most vulnerable night of her life and deemed her a fraud, a willing participant in her own humiliation. The person who understood her most had become her harshest judge. So she systematically dismantled the golden girl. Law school was a deliberate choice. The world of law was built on evidence, precedents, clear arguments. There was no room for the messy ambiguity of a broken heart, for misunderstandings that couldn't be explained. She sought order, justice, clarity, things her personal life had violently denied her. She dated nice men, successful men, but she found herself emotionally bilingual, speaking one language of polite interest while her heart whispered in another, older tongue of salt air, and whispered secrets in a dusty bookshop. She kept a distance, a polite, uncrossable moat around the ruins inside her. Daniel was excised completely. Her family, embarrassed by the incident, had coldly cut ties with him. She needed no second order. The memory of his hand on her elbow, filling her glass, was enough to make her skin crawl. He became a footnote in the story of her great collapse. 10 years passed. Lena became a respected attorney in San Francisco, her office boasting a view of another cold, beautiful bay. She was known for her sharp mind and her impenetrable composure. No one knew that her calm was a fortress, built stone by stone over a wound that never truly closed. One Tuesday evening, waiting for a late conference call, she idly scrolled through a digital arts magazine. A headline caught her eye. Kay and the Anatomy of Loss, an exclusive interview. Her breath hitched. There was a small, grainy photo of the artist. He was turned partly away, but the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, it was him. Older, harder, but him. Her finger trembled as she clicked. The article gushed about his upcoming solo exhibition, Echoes of Absence. The centerpiece was a piece called The Lost Light. The interviewer asked about its inspiration. Lena read Kay's quoted reply, and each word was a needle, finding an old, deep nerve. It's about the death of innocence, he said. It's about thinking you know someone's heart, only to realize you were in love with a reflection of your own need. You weren't loving a person. You were loving the shadow you asked them to fill. The room felt airless. Lena read the lines again and again. Her mind, trained in interpretation, delivered a brutal verdict. He was saying she was false, that the girl he'd loved was a mirage, a reflection of his own loneliness, not a real person with fears and flaws and a desperate, drunken phone call made in panic. He was canonizing his own victimhood and painting her as the hollow illusion. The old pain roared back, but it was different now. It was hotter, sharper, laced with a fresh adult fury. For 10 years she had carried the guilt of his misunderstanding, the weight of his wrongful condemnation. And now he was out in the world, famous, reducing their history, her, to a clinical commentary on self-deception. A cold resolve crystallized within her. The exhibition was in San Francisco. It was fate's cruel joke, or perhaps its final offer of a reckoning. She would not go to reconnect. She would not go to explain. There was no explanation left that could span the chasm of a decade built on a broken phone line. She would go to face him, to look the man, the artist, the judge, the ghost, in the eye one last time. To stand before the lost light and silently say to the memory of the boy she loved, "You were wrong." And then maybe she could finally walk away from his shadow for good. Lena walked into the gallery on a Thursday evening, a lone figure in a tailored black suit amidst the art crowd's flowing silks and statement jewelry. She felt like a soldier walking onto a battlefield she'd spent a decade avoiding. The air was cool, hushed, smelling of white wine and the faint, clean scent of stone dust. She followed the discreet arrows pointing toward the main exhibition hall. The room was dark, a cathedral of shadows. The only light was a single brilliant spotlight focused on the centerpiece. The Lost Light. It was a marble sculpture. A life-sized figure of a woman, turned away, her face hidden. Her posture was not one of defeat, but of a profound frozen sorrow. One wing stretched behind her, elegant and strong. The other was fractured, a clean, heartbreaking break mid-span, The fragments suggested but not shown, as if they had dissolved into the air around her. The marble seemed to glow from within, capturing both a divine beauty and a terrible human fragility. It wasn't a caricature, it wasn't a mockery. It was a love letter written in grief, a monument to something achingly precious that had been shattered. All the prepared anger, the sharp legal arguments she'd mentally rehearsed evaporated. Lena stood perfectly still. The breath left her lungs in a soft, shuddering sea. She saw it, not a judgment, but a confession. This was Kai's pain, given form. Hard, cold, permanent. He had not moved on. He had petrified. He had been suffering all this time because of her, but why? The question echoed in the silent chamber of her heart. If he believed she was a hollow, false person who had chosen another man, why carve her in stone with such excruciating, reverent pain? She didn't know how long she stood there. Time dissolved. Silent tears traced hot paths down her cheeks. A decade of confusion and hurt finally finding its mirror in the cold, beautiful marble before her. Bah. Kai had been in the back, reviewing inventory lists, a shield of paperwork against the opening night buzz. He needed to speak to a critic from a major magazine. Steeling himself, he walked into the main hall. And then he saw her. A silhouette he would have known in absolute darkness. The line of her neck, the way she held herself, even after 10 years, it was a punch to his solar plexus. Lena, here, in the temple he had built to their ruin. His heart didn't just pound, it seemed to stutter and stop. The noise of the gallery faded into a distant hum. He watched her, this ghost-made flesh, standing before the sculpture that was his soul laid bare. He saw her shoulders tremble. He saw her hand come up, a fleeting touch to her own cheek. A part of him, the wounded animal, wanted to flee. Another part, the artist who had spent a decade asking this marble ghost questions, needed to face the answer. He moved on autopilot, his feet carrying him across the polished concrete floor. He stopped a few feet behind her, his voice emerging rough from disuse, a carefully constructed wall of ice in every syllable. Lena. She didn't startle. She had felt his presence, the way one feels a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Slowly she turned. Time had been kind to her, but it had also changed her. The softness of the girl from the cliffs was overlaid with a poised, elegant strength. Her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, held not vulnerability now, but the focused intensity of a litigator. She looked at him, really looked, and Kai felt 10 years of armor crack. Surprised to see you here, he said, the words flat. Lena wiped a tear away with a sharp, defiant motion. I came to see how the man who convicted me is living now. Her voice was low, controlled, but it vibrated with a raw edge. Is the shadow you created beautiful enough for you, Kai? The old nickname, spoken with such bitterness, was another crack in his facade. He crossed his arms, a defensive gesture. It's not a shadow, it's a memory. A memory you got wrong, she shot back, her composure fraying. Do you have any idea what you did after you blocked me? I called you 100 times. I flew to New York. I went to your dorm. Your roommate said you'd vanished. You just erased me. Kai let out a short, humorless laugh. It sounded harsh in the quiet space. After everything that happened, you expected me to welcome you with open arms? What happened? Lena's voice rose, echoing slightly in the vaulted room. A few people at the periphery glanced over. She didn't care. What exactly do you think happened, Kai? The big event that warranted you destroying us? You know what happened, he fired back, his own coolness dissolving into the heat of a decade-old wound. The picture, the call. You and your Daniel. The call, she repeated, stepping closer. Her eyes were blazing. The call where I was drunk and scared out of my mind because Daniel was getting arrested for drunk driving and I was a passenger. The call where I needed you, that call. The words landed between them like a physical object. Kai blinked. The anger on his face faltered, replaced by confusion. Drunk driving, he repeated, the phrase foreign in the context of his long-held story. Yes, he was pulled over and he blew over the limit. They took him. I was stranded, terrified, and humiliated. That's why I said me and Daniel, we got stopped by the police because we were in his car. Kai took an unconscious step back as if her words had force. His mind, so rigidly fixed on its narrative, scrambled to process this new information. The puzzle pieces he'd forced together a decade ago were coming apart. You said, we got stopped, he murmured, more to himself than to her. I thought you meant... Lena stared at him, her own anger freezing into something else. Dawning, horrific comprehension. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words muffled. "You thought we got arrested for something else. You thought we were together, in trouble together, like a couple." The reality of his misunderstanding, vast and tragic, unfolded before her. "And you never knew the truth? All this time?" Kai's face had gone pale. The confident, reclusive artist was gone, replaced by the lost, haunted boy she once knew. The bedrock of his last 10 years was shifting into quicksand. He looked from her horrified face to the marble sculpture, the angel with the broken wing, the monument to his pain over her betrayal. "But the picture," he said weakly, his voice hollow. "Your mother's post? 2 brilliant futures. The whole world, your whole world wanted you with him. It was so clear." He was defending his truth, the only one he had, even as it crumbled. Lena let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh of sheer disbelief. They were standing in a gallery of his making, surrounded by the physical evidence of their mutual devastation. And for the first time, the lights were coming on, revealing they had been in different prisons entirely. The confrontation was over. In its place was a chasm of tragic, wasted years and the terrifying, glimmering possibility that the person standing across from them was not the monster they'd each spent a decade fighting, but the same wounded soul they had always loved. They didn't leave the gallery. The public space was too exposed, the weight of this unraveling truth too immense. Wordlessly, Kai led her through a side door into a small, cluttered office behind the main hall. Canvases leaned against walls, the air smelled of coffee and turpentine. He poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey from a bottle on a shelf, his hands not quite steady. They sat on 2 old drafting stools, the distance between them charged with 10 years of ghosts. "Tell me," Kai said, his voice raw. "Tell me everything." And Lena did. She spoke of the hollow days after the call, the frantic flight to New York, the empty dorm room. She told him about law school, about choosing a world of rules to combat the chaos of her heart. She confessed her belief that he saw her as a fraud, that his art was a public indictment of the girl he thought she'd pretended to be. "I thought you hated the real me," she whispered, staring into her glass. The messy, scared one who made a stupid mistake. Then it was his turn. The words came haltingly at first, then in a torrent. He spoke of the consuming belief in her betrayal, how it had felt like a final confirmation of his deepest fear, that he was unworthy of good things. "That picture, it was proof. It showed the life you were supposed to have, a life without complications, without me." He admitted to the furious, punishing drive of his work. "I wasn't just making art, I was building a tomb for us, for the part of me that believed in light." He looked at her, his eyes haunted. "I lived in a story where I was the victim of your choice. It was the only story that made the pain make sense." They cried, not delicate tears, but the deep, shuddering sobs of grief finally released. They also laughed, a wet, broken sound, at the sheer tragic absurdity of it all. A decade of separate suffering, built on a foundation of a bad phone connection and a well-framed Instagram post. The space between their stools seemed to shrink. They weren't the polished attorney and the renowned artist anymore. They were just Lena and Kai, 2 people who had loved each other at 17 and had spent every day since nursing wounds the other had never intended to inflict. Finally, the talking subsided into a heavy, healing silence. Lena placed her glass down. She stood, her legs unsteady, and took a step toward him. Kai looked up, his face a map of exhaustion and vulnerability. She didn't say anything. She simply opened her arms. He folded into her embrace like a collapsing star. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking tears. She held him tightly, her own tears soaking into his shirt. It was not a romantic hug. It was a desperate, clinging, necessary merging. It was an apology, an absolution, and a funeral for the 10 lost years, all at once. It held love, yes, but also a bottomless well of regret and a pain so profound it felt woven into their bones. What followed were months of fragile, precious reconstruction. Kai found a small studio in a quiet town just across the bay from San Francisco. They moved slowly, carefully, as if handling something both priceless and shattered. They spent weekends walking along new stretches of coast, their hands finding each other's naturally, fingers lacing together. They talked about ordinary things, about the future, about the past, without flinching. Kai began to change. The harsh lines of tension around his eyes softened. He started sketching again, but the subjects were different. Sun-dappled leaves, the curve of Lena's smile as she read, the quiet strength of a weathered tree. Light began to seep back into his work. Lena, in turn, seemed to shed an invisible weight. The professional armor she wore daily felt less like a cage. She laughed more freely, a sound that reminded Kai of the girl on the cliffs. They were happy, a cautious, grateful, deeply in love happiness. They allowed themselves to believe the worst was behind them. They had faced the monster of their misunderstanding and slain it together. The future felt like a clean page. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the past reached out a rotting hand and snatched that page away. Lena was at her office, preparing for a deposition. Kai was in his new studio, covered in a fine layer of clay dust, humming along to the radio. His phone buzzed on the workbench, a number he didn't recognize, with a troubled area code he knew all too well. A cold premonition slithered down his spine. He wiped his hands and answered. "Hello?" The voice that came through was a raspy, venomous whisper, weak but unmistakable, and it was a sound from his nightmares. "Well, well, son, heard you're doing real well for yourself." Kai's blood turned to ice. He couldn't speak. "An artist now, fancy, and I hear you're back with that rich little girlfriend of yours." A wet coughing chuckle. "Must be nice." "What do you want?" Kai managed to grind out, his knuckles white around the phone. "What does a dying man want?" his father wheezed. "A little help. The doctors say my liver's shot. Cirrhosis, end stage. I need treatment. Expensive treatment. I don't have 500,000. The number hung in the dusty air of the studio. Obscene. "You get that for me. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," Kai hissed, the old fury rising like bile. "Oh, I think you do." The voice dropped, intimate with malice. "See, if you don't, I might have to pay a visit to your fancy girlfriend. Have a little chat. Tell her some stories about that night. The one where you pushed your own crippled father. Where you made me into this broken thing for the rest of my life." The world tilted. Kai's vision swam. The secret, the ugliest, most shameful secret of his life, buried for over a decade, was being dug up and used as a weapon. It wasn't a lie. In a final, horrific confrontation during his senior year, his drunken father had lunged at him with a bottle. Kai had shoved him away in blind panic. His father had fallen backward, his spine striking the sharp edge of his own wheelchair. The damage had been permanent. "It was an accident," Kai whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You were going to kill me." "Details," his father spat. "How do you think your lawyer lady will see it? How will her pristine family see it? The violent kid from the wrong side of the tracks? Who put his own father in a home? You think you fit in her world now? You'll always be trash, boy. And for $500,000, I'll keep your dirty little secret from tarnishing her perfect life." The call ended. Kai stood motionless in the center of his bright new studio. The smell of clay now smelled of grave dirt. The happiness of the past few months evaporated, replaced by the old, familiar terror. The terror of being the contaminant, the stain, the burden. He had sworn he would never pull Lena into the swamp of his past. Now the swamp was rising to claim them both. He looked at his hands, coated in the dust of creation, and saw only the hands that had once, in fear and self-preservation, changed a man's life forever. The shadow he thought he'd escaped had just stretched across the sun, longer and darker than ever. Kai moved like a ghost through his own life. He contacted his dealer, a grim-faced man who understood tragedy had a market price. He sold Early Sorrow, the very first sculpture he'd made of Lena in New York, a piece of raw, young agony. He sold reproduction rights, future commissions, anything liquid. It wasn't enough, but it was a crushing sum. It felt like selling pieces of his own bones. He met his father in the parking lot of a rundown motel on the edge of town. The man was a shrunken version of the monster from his memories, propped in a wheelchair, his skin the color of old newspaper. Kai handed over a thick envelope without a word. His father's trembling hands counted the bills, a greedy light flickering in his watery eyes. "Good. For now," he rasped. "But I'm keeping our little secret. Never know when I might need a top-up." The words confirmed Kai's deepest fear. This was a bottomless pit. There would be no end, only escalation. The contamination would never stop. He looked at this broken, venomous man and saw the inescapable truth of his own origin. A truth he could not, would not, drag Lena into. The decision, though it felt like tearing out his own heart, was the only one he could make. It was an old script. He was the destroyer, and his final act of love would be to destroy the thing that threatened her. He went to her apartment. He had rehearsed the lines, building a wall of coldness brick by brick. When she opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of him, he almost faltered. "We tried," he said, his voice detached, as if discussing a failed experiment. "It's not working. I realized I can't do this. I'm still that broken thing. I'll only ruin you. You should go. Live your life." Lena stood perfectly still. The light in her eyes didn't just dim, it seemed to freeze. She searched his face, and what she saw there wasn't the absence of love, but a terrible, familiar fear. It was the look from the library, from the cliffs, the look of a boy braced for a blow. Her heart shattered, but her mind, sharpened by a decade of parsing lies, clicked. This wasn't an ending he wanted. It was a sacrifice he thought he had to make. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just said softly, "Okay, Kai," and closed the door. The next morning, Lena moved through her law office like an automaton. Grief was a thick fog. She was staring blankly at a contract when her office line rang. The receptionist's voice was hesitant. "Ms. Lena, there's a gentleman on the line for you. He wouldn't give a name. He sounds insistent." A cold certainty settled in her gut. "Put him through." The voice that slithered into her ear was weak, wheezing, and dripping with malice. "You're Lena, Kai's rich little girlfriend." "Who is this?" A wet chuckle. "Oh, his father. We need to talk. If we don't, I might have to have a chat with the newspapers. Tell them all about my ungrateful son, the one who put his own father in a wheelchair and left him to rot." Lena's grip on the phone tightened, but her voice was the calm, level tone she used in court. "What do you want?" "A meeting, just a chat, 3 p.m., the diner on the corner of 5th and Main." She went, not out of fear, but out of a burning need for the final piece of the puzzle. The man at the booth was a specter of neglect. He wasted no time. "The boy owes me. He didn't pay in full. Now I hear you've got money. You pay the rest." "What are you holding over him?" Lena asked, her gaze steady. "The truth," he sneered. "That he's a violent brute. That he pushed me down the stairs when he was 17, just for trying to discipline his no-good mother. That's who you're in love with, girl." Lena didn't flinch. "I've only heard one side, and I know Kai. If that happened, it wasn't the simple story you're telling. What you're doing is extortion. That's a felony." He slammed a frail hand on the Formica table, a pathetic echo of past violence. "You threatening me? I'm a dying man, but I'll take him down with me. You want his career ruined? His name dragged through the mud? Pay up and I disappear." Lena stood, gathering her purse. Her composure was her armor. "I won't give you a cent, and I advise you strongly, do nothing foolish. Every call, every threat from now on is potential evidence. I am a lawyer. Remember that." She walked out, leaving him sputtering in furious shock. As she drove, the pieces locked into place with a devastating clarity. Kai had faced this alone. He had taken the threat, the shame, and chosen to push her away to protect her again. The old, heartbreaking pattern, repeated with adult consequences. She didn't go home. She drove north, the city blurring into coastline, until she found the familiar, winding road to the cliffs. The ocean spread out, vast and indifferent, just as it had a lifetime ago. And there he was, a solitary figure at the edge of the world, his silhouette almost blending into the gathering dusk. She walked across the coarse grass until she stood beside him. For a long moment, they just listened to the crash and sigh of the waves below. "You just saw your father, didn't you?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried over the wind. Kai jerked as if struck. He turned, his face ashen. How do you know? Did he find you? What did he do to you?" Lena looked at him, her eyes clear and unwavering. "He found me to threaten and extort me, and he told me his story." Kai's breath came in ragged gasps. "Lena, let me explain. It was an accident. I was trying to protect my mom. I never meant to." She cut him off, her voice a mix of anguish and iron resolve. "I don't need an explanation about that past. I believe you. I have always believed you. What I can't accept is you making decisions for me again. You think pushing me away is protection? After everything we've lost, after everything we've learned, do you still think I'm that fragile?" He trembled, the wind whipping at his clothes. "I didn't want that ugliness to touch you. The scandal, the way people would look at you." She took a step closer, her voice thick with emotion but unbreakable. "Kai, I love you. I love all of you. The past, the scars, everything. We lost 10 years because we were too afraid to face the hard things together. Do you really want us to lose more time, lose us just because you're scared?" She held out her hand. Not to take his, but as an offering, a choice. "This time we face it together. Your father, the past, all of it. It's either together or it's nothing at all. This is the last choice. Do you have the courage? Kai looked at her outstretched hand. He looked into her eyes, which held no pity, only a fierce, unshakable love. The kind that doesn't run from darkness, but stands beside you in it. Tears, not of sorrow, but of a profound, releasing gratitude, streamed down his face. He didn't speak. Words were too small. He simply reached out and took her hand, his grip so tight it spoke of vows more binding than any ceremony. They stood there, hand in hand, on the cliff where their story had truly begun. Before them, the vast ocean turned gold and violet with the setting sun. Ahead lay a difficult, ugly battle. Legal, emotional, psychological. But for the first time, the path ahead did not look like a lonely precipice. It looked like a road, and they would walk it side by side. Two small, stubborn figures against the endless sea and the coming night, choosing not a perfect happy ending, but a brave and shared beginning.
Wow, this story really got me. It's such a heartbreaking reminder of how a simple lack of communication can completely derail two people's lives for a decade. I felt so angry and sad that one bad phone call and a social media post can cause all that pain. But I think Lena never gave up on fighting the truth, even that all those years. If you like this story, please like and comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting stories. Thank you for your listening.